Okay, folks, here we are. It is time again for another 8 ways to. Today, 8 ways to stop wasting time and goodwill in your next performance review. I think this is an incredibly important conversation to have because people hate annual reviews. I don't know anybody who likes the process, not the reviewers, not the reviewed, very often not the employment attorneys who may be on the hook for trying to do things one way or the other in support of the company. Um, in general, they are wasted effort at best, and often even kind of a relationship sabotaging effort. It doesn't have to be that way. And so today, I'm excited to be talking about this with you. And I'm very excited to have a guest today. Kieran Snyder has been for years the founder and CEO of a company called Textio, which helps you hire and retain diverse talent. And AI before AI was the talk of the century. Um, Kieran, welcome and congratulations on your transition from one form of leadership at Textio to another.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and celebrating my role change. I'm really, really excited. Yes, I was the founding CEO of Textio for 9 years, which the time really flew by. If you don't know, kind of fun fact is I co-founded the company with Textio's current CEO, Jensen Harris, who is also my spouse. So we founded the company together. So I'm still literally married to Textio.
I knew all of that
Um,
except for the spouse part.
there you got to always leave them with a little surprise. So I am now the chief scientist emeritus at Textio, and really excited to have a little bit of a break from the day-to-day leadership grind, getting to focus on language and data stories and
Mm.
management. Maybe I'll write a book this year. I'm really, really excited to be here talking about this. I have been passionate about performance reviews and how to make them more effective and humane for at least 15 years now, writing about the topic and researching the
Mm.
topics. Thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm now imagining various scenes around the dinner table.
That's
Uh,
right.
our companies were born probably around the same time. It was 9 years in September for our company's beginnings. So how
There
fun!
you go. There you go.
All right, so 8 ways to stop wasting time and goodwill in your next performance reviews. You've got four. I've got four. And as any regular viewers know, you don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what you're going to say. And so this is an adventure for us as much as it is an adventure for you. Kieran, what is your first suggestion?
My first suggestion is care enough to be specific and
Mm,
stay organized enough to be specific. So, whether you're providing a positive assessment or a more critical or constructive assessment, we know that it's not meaningful unless it's supported by specific examples. And so, if you're only really providing feedback to somebody once a year, which all too sadly is the case in a lot of organizations, recency bias is really common. You're like, oh, geez, I better come up with a couple of examples. What happened
mm,
last week? What happened maybe last month if you've got a long memory? And so, simple thing as a manager you can do is keep track of your examples that illustrate patterns. Just jot them down throughout the year. And by the way, we know that some groups of people are more likely to receive specific and actionable feedback than others. Specifically, women of color in the organization are much less likely to receive specific feedback. Black women, 9 times less actionable feedback than white men. So it's not distributed evenly. And I will say it turns out that it matters. People who do not receive specific feedback, even if they get good reviews, are 63% more likely to quit in the next year. So that's my number one tip.
how intriguing. I mean, I'm 100% with you on the tip, and I'm so intrigued and disappointed by the statistic that you cited. Um, what is it, an absence of actionable feedback that women of color are receiving, or are they receiving something different instead?
They receive less feedback overall. That is true.
Hmm.
Especially, again, Black women receive the lowest amount of feedback by pure
Mm.
volume. Across, by the way, 250 organizations, 25,000 people. This isn't like just a one organization situation. But the feedback they do receive is significantly less likely to contain examples. So,
Mm.
again, whether positive or negative, the feedback is more likely to be, you did a great job,
Thanks
or
a lot. What do I do with that?
your work sometimes was missing some details. Like,
Hmm.
okay.
Speaking of things missing details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that it's not just the volume, it's the quality of what's getting written, even in the reduced volume of feedback.
Mm. It's so, I mean, that's such an important thing to notice. And one of the things that I like about the idea that you're saying, keep a record, track what are the examples that you can use, is that I imagine that also you can use to track yourself in terms of the distribution of feedback that you're giving. So if you've got 4, 6, 8 direct reports, and you're keeping a list of, here are the things that I have noticed and here are the things that I have given feedback about, then you can compare those lists and ask yourself, am I distributing my feedback equitably?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one. Y'all know I'm a I'm not a softball girl. I'm a software girl through and through. I'm a basketball girl. Um, but this is a place where you don't even need software to support you, right? It
Yeah.
is, in fact, by the way, the most commonly discovered gap by Textio and people's feedback. It's the guidance the software itself gives the most, which is, hey, you're missing an example here. Please provide one.
Mm.
But you don't even need a second opinion. You don't need software. You don't need anything complicated. You literally just need your notebook. Every week, every month, jot down something that the person did that was particularly effective and jot down a learning opportunity. And by the way, if you do that right, you're going to bring it into your one-on-ones.
A
They're
hundred
not going
percent.
to wait a year to hear the example. And then
Yeah.
when they get to the end of your review, they'll be like, yep, heard that, heard that, heard that. I get it. I see the pattern.
In a less digital world, and I still make this recommendation, in a less digital world, I often recommend it to people, if you don't have your notebook with you, grab a Post-it, and write on 123, I gave Kieran the following feedback, for better or for worse, right? I don't love the word positive or negative. Constructive feedback.
Mhm.
I gave her kudos, or I asked for an adjustment, and here it is. Quick jot. You can just stick that right inside a file that you're keeping of the person that you are um, supervising. And I love that Textio will give you immediate feedback. Here's what's missing from this.
Exactly. And
Uh,
he, and I say care enough to be specific, because I do think it's, if you care about people developing their best selves, delivering their best work, if you're not specific, again, whether you're offering something that's an accolade or something that's more constructive, you can't count on the performance, right? You have
mhm.
to tell people what's good about their work or what the opportunity for improvement is, if you want the performance to improve. And as a manager, you should certainly care about that because you're accountable for it.
Indeed. And I love also, the other thing I love about the word care is, I care deeply for my wife, for example. She doesn't always experience that because I don't always provide the care. Right? Care is
Mhm.
not just a feeling; it is also an action. And so
Love that.
I agree that to provide the specifics is an act of care that allows the other person to experience the care that you may feel.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for what a great. I mean, that just prompted a whole lot of good conversation. My first suggestion is I'm going to bring up a key word. Make your performance reviews uneventful. One of the ways you can do this is to make them more frequent, quarterly, even monthly, a formal or semi-formal review, so that this is not some event that is looming in the distance and then looming larger and larger and larger. It's just simply something that happens as a regular part of your business cycle. So uneventful, frequent, that's my suggestion.
I love that. One of the tactics that I've used sometimes for that, or that I've recommended to others to use, is for everyone who works for you, have a simple one-page document, just one page, and it contains 3 sections. What are baseline, like what does good look like?
Mm,
If you do this, great job. You're getting
yeah.
paid. You're not getting good job, right? What does great look like? What is, a little bit beyond that? If you do this, you might be getting promoted. Like this
Mm,
is really excellent, excellent. And then what are the top couple of things you should keep in mind in terms of development right now? And revisit this document and use it to structure a one-on-one every month. Now, what good looks like and what great looks like doesn't change too often unless you're changing roles, maybe gradually. But what you're working on every month does shift because people develop new skills or new projects come into focus. And I love the simple structure of just monthly, just one page. It's not doesn't feel like a performance review. You don't need your organization to have a formal process around this to do it as a manager. So I love that type. Are there things you've seen work to help it feel uneventful, so to
mm.
speak, from the employee standpoint?
Well, yes, and so I'm wrestling with whether to. I'll hang on to that question and answer
Okay.
in my
In a
second
subsequent.
suggestion. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm making a mental note, and then I'll turn to you for your second suggestion, Kieran.
Okay. My second suggestion, maybe no surprise if you know Textio, is to check your bias, get
Mm,
another perspective. Um, so, look, people are human. We all bring the experiences that we have had ourselves to every interaction that we have in our personal lives and at work. And that means that we all contain the bias that comes from our lived experiences. No exceptions here, right? And so, especially when you're providing something as important and as central to your management responsibility as input on somebody's performance, which becomes their compensation, their career path. Like this is a meaty responsibility. It's really important that you have mechanisms to check your bias. So again, I'm a software person. We build software to do this. Even if you're not using software to help you spot the places where maybe you're not bringing the same level of quality or integrity to your feedback as you'd like to, just getting that second opinion from somebody who isn't in the situation. I love to say, okay, get that second reader to help you, to say, if you were the employee, what are the top 2 things you'd be taking away about your performance? And you might be surprised what comes back. I
mm.
have never had a neutral reader take a look at something that I've written and not had at least some valuable insight come out of it, whether that neutral reader is a person or is software designed for the purpose.
I love this suggestion on so many levels. Um, the bias. I mean, bias is not a bad thing, right? I mean, it's necessary. It's basically our brain's way of making a shortcut so that we don't have to think through every darn thing that we do. So it's critical. So telling you that you have bias is not my way of saying you suck. It's a way of
Absolutely.
acknowledging fact. And I did a little video for LinkedIn a while ago, Kieran. I think on Thanksgiving. A friend of mine texted me a little something about the game he was going to watch, um, and I guess he was a Cowboys fan, and talked about their game, and that he was going to be watching later. And I'm not a sports fan, really. I enjoy watching when it's on, but I follow nothing. And I was just curious. I wonder who the Cowboys are playing, and so I asked Google, and Google said they're playing the Commanders. And I thought, I've never heard of the Commanders. I wonder who they are. And so I wrote, I asked Google who the Commanders are. It turns out they're the team that plays in Washington, D.C. And when I used to live near Washington, D.C., I rooted for the Redskins. And so, and I've been watching a little bit the whole controversy about whether or not to change the Redskins' name since that controversy began. And I have been a staunch supporter of the idea that that name should go and be replaced by something else. And at the same time as I am solid in my conviction that the name should change, even discovering that this team is now called the Commanders, I think that's the wrong name. They're the Redskins. That's bias at play. Even though intellectually I know I want this name to change, I still feel like it's wrong. How funny are we?
Yeah. I mean, and the more different you are from the person to whom you're providing feedback, the more likely you are to have things slip through that you are totally not conscious of. And it's really important, not just for fairness purposes, which of course it's important, but also, again, you want the person to whom you're taking the time to provide feedback to be able to internalize it, use it, and grow from it. And so if you're not conscious of the bias is really distracting. It really prevents somebody from hearing the signal and what you're trying to communicate. So that's my number two.
Yeah.
Tip.
It's so important to highlight that we want our feedback to land on fertile soil, right? You were just saying you want them to be able to take it in and make adjustments on the basis of your feedback. And it reminds me of how important it is to make the shift from the idea that feedback is about what happened to the fact that effective feedback is about what people are going to do next.
Right.
We refer to the past in order to influence the future. And if you're not giving feedback in a way that is going to have the maximum likelihood of landing on fertile ground, then you are messing up the future.
That's absolutely true.
All right. My second suggestion for the folks at home is deliver no surprises. So we've been talking about the next performance review, look back, and all feedback is going to be in some way, despite what I just said, about looking back. And a performance review is a time to talk about the feedback that you've been giving people all along. And so you're coming back to the list as opposed to saying, here's something that you don't know that I think about your performance.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold one of my comments for my next item because we don't have
Yeah.
overlap, but we have, I'll say, adjacency in a useful way. But this is, I don't know. Again, the overarching tip for most of these tips, from the manager standpoint, is about practicing empathy. Like every one of us who's ever worked for a boss and gotten a performance review has been surprised by something.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel great. Even if it seems like a pleasant surprise, it doesn't feel great. If I knew that was what you cared about, I would have done more of it.
Yeah. How come I
right?
didn't know this before?
Right.
Yeah.
And these conversations can be by default fraught with so much stress and tension on the part of the employee and the manager. The fastest way to up that stress is to have like a big reveal that you haven't shared with somebody before the conversation, right? If it just feels like a part of a natural cadence of conversations you've had all along, much less dramatized.
And you had a question for me while I was talking about my last suggestion that I said I was going to refer back to. Do you remember what the question was?
Yeah, I was wondering, are there ways you see that people can structure these monthly or quarterly conversations so
Yeah.
that they don't feel like, federal events each
Yeah.
time? They
So this
feel,
is a
yeah,
big part of it, right? Is we're just looking back at conversations that we've already had. If we're looking back at conversations that we've already had and had frequently and had recently, that's going to be a big part of not making this an event.
yep,
I think another big part of it is to uh, to have it connected, not just to, what the company needs, but when you really understand what I'm going to share in my next tip. So these are all, these are all working together in a systematic fashion, as you just said, Kieran, to create this environment of empathy. And I make a distinction between empathy and compassion. I think it's Kim Scott who wrote Radical Candor, who talks about ruinous empathy. Right, empathy alone can create a very destructive environment.
Yeah.
To join that empathy with a profound commitment to purpose, that's what I think of as compassion. Kieran, what's your third suggestion?
Yeah. Okay. Ask yourself, this is for the manager, is there something I'm avoiding saying? Then say it. Right?
Wow.
I think when I talk to managers who have to give difficult feedback in particular, um, the tendency is, well, I don't want to make this person who's working super hard feel bad. I know they tried. I know, maybe we have different styles. I don't want to come down too hard on something that it's going to really demotivate them. Well, what happens? You fast forward 6 months to the performance review, and that thing is the reason the person didn't get promoted. And that goes back to your last tip, about surprises. And I'll say, like, I have particularly, again, seen this come up when there is an identity difference between the manager and the
Mhm.
employee. So men giving feedback to women, white people giving feedback to Black people, for example. I have worked with so many white managers who said, I have to give this feedback, but gosh, I don't want to seem racist.
Mhm.
And in the process of trying to not seem racist, they may actually be racist, because what's happening then is they avoid giving the constructive feedback to their employees of color that they might give to somebody with a background more like their own. And guess who grows faster, right? So the top thing is, if you're avoiding saying something, you can get coaching on how to say it, right? You might be nervous for a reason. It's totally fine to get that support. But if there's something you're avoiding, it's a pretty good sign that there's something you need to be communicating.
Yeah, and those concerns about racism that you just named, I don't doubt contribute to the statistic that you cited earlier
Yes.
about women of color receiving, what did you say, 90 or 95% less feedback?
Not 9 times less
9 times less
actionable
feedback.
feedback, Black
That
women
is,
compared to white
yeah.
men. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so it's really important to figure out how to not be walking on eggshells.
Exactly. I said, get the support you need, get the coaching you need. Sometimes things are really difficult to communicate, and it's good to be conscious
Yeah,
of that, but don't avoid it. You'll regret it later. And those people
yeah.
will leave your organization. Again, 63% more likely to quit within a
N-
year. People don't
Not
get the actionable feedback.
not part of one of my 4 bits of advice that I have for our listeners is the idea that you've got to come up with a system for this is how we give feedback. This is a method, your repeated structure for giving feedback that is
Yes.
open and structured.
Yes.
All right. My third suggestion is to tie input to WIFM. In other words, WIFM is an acronym for what's in it for me. So I was starting to say last time that I, I'm not only going to tie my feedback to what does the company need right now, but also you, my direct report, have told me that this is what you want for your future in your career. And so I'm going to tie my feedback to your personal goals so that this is uh, so that it's very abundantly clear that in giving you this feedback, my intention, as you talked about earlier, Kieran, is to care for you, to support you, and to support your goals.
Yes. I mean, I often say, like, the manager responsibility at its core is to align the right work to the right people so that the work and the people succeed. That's like the name of the game
Mm.
in management. If you can align the right work to the right people so the work succeeds and the people succeed, you win. And part of helping the people succeed is being conscious of what they're trying to do with their lives and their careers so that you can help in that alignment set them up for not only the work that they know how to do today, but like really hold them accountable to the improvement that they need to get where they want to go. If you have someone who works for you who wants to be on boards and you know they're not board ready, make that part of the conversation next year,
Yeah.
right? If you have
Right.
somebody who wants to become a manager and you know that they're missing key skills, you got to tell them because they're not going to achieve what they want to achieve without it,
Yeah.
right?
Because you told me you want to be a manager, I'm going to be particularly fastidious with you around this piece of your performance.
Beautiful. Love that.
Right.
Really well said.
Like, who wouldn't be grateful?
Exactly. Beautiful.
Kieran, before we hear your fourth and final suggestion, maybe final, who knows, maybe there'll be some bonuses. Before we hear your fourth suggestion, why don't you take a moment to share with people who are listening how and why they might get a hold of you, how and why they might get a hold of Textio.
Yeah, probably the easiest and quickest way to keep track of what I'm doing is on my LinkedIn. So you can feel free to check me out on LinkedIn, Kieran Snyder. And I use some other social too, but that's probably the most reliable. And I'm going to be launching a couple of new projects pretty soon that I'm excited to share with people. So follow me there. For Textio specifically, all of what we're talking about today, if you want to try it for yourself, you can go to textio.com/lift hyphen waitlist. And you can actually get feedback on your feedback as you're writing it. That's free. So you should give it a try. And if you're interested in any of the data that we're talking about here, you can go to textio.com/report, and you're going to get all the 2023 data about performance feedback, the connection to employee retention and attrition, some of the demographic patterns of bias that again show up across tens of thousands of people at hundreds of organizations. So those are two great ways to kind of level up some of your own feedback capability. You can always drop the team a note at info@textio.com if you have questions about any of that.
Love it. All right, Kieran, it's time for your fourth suggestion about how folks can stop wasting time and goodwill in their next performance review.
Okay, I saved like my most important one for last. I have so much to say about this. Make it matter. Hold managers accountable. So I'm going to tell you a story. I was on the phone with talent management leaders in an organization recently that were really, really concerned about whether their managers were having effective coaching conversations with their team members, like very common concern, right? And I said, okay, let me ask you a hypothetical question. If you have a manager in your organization who is hitting all of their business metrics, let's say it's a sales leader who's hitting their sales attainment goal, their revenue goal every quarter, or maybe it's an engineering leader who is shipping products on time that are really high quality. They're hitting those goals, but you discover they're never meeting with their team, or you discover the attrition out of their team. The patterns show you that a lot of good people are leaving the organization. Would that manager get promoted or would they get fired? And this is a real bellwether question, because if somebody answers that question in confusion, like, well, what do you mean fired? They hit their number, they shipped their product, of course they'd get promoted. That tells you that is an organization where managers are not actually accountable for managing. And so we can often say, we want to give resources to help managers do better. A lot of HR teams do this really well. They have great training programs or what have you. But at the end of the day, accountability means it's the thing that gets you promoted or fired. That's what actual accountability is. And so I feel for HR leaders who don't have the support of their counterparts around the executive team, or their CEO even, who are not necessarily bought into that. But if you don't have that buy-in, that it's a real accountability, everything else you invest in, best case, is going to give you like some best effort results, but it's not really going to move the needle on a performance culture in the organization. So you've got to hold managers accountable, which means their own performance reviews have to depend on how effectively they
Love it.
manage, which includes giving feedback. So, and it's
Right.
very rare that organizations do this. Very,
So,
very rare.
so true, right? What gets measured gets done. And so if you're
Exactly.
not measuring it, it's not going to get done. And yeah, if you're only rewarding direct bottom line business results, then you're going to be, even if you're not warm and squishy like Kieran and I may tend to be, it's going to affect the bottom line indirectly.
Yeah. And I would say even more, it's a little bit gaslighty to say that you care about performance management and feedback if in fact the only thing you are going to reward is the bottom line business results. Like, I almost have more respect for a leader who's just upfront and is like, here's what, like, because I tend to believe that as leaders, if you're honest about your values,
Yes.
you draw the people who make sense in your organization, right?
Yes.
And people are adults, they vote with their feet. If the values don't work for them, they'll leave. And you should be good with that, because they're
Yes.
not your people if they don't share your values. And so if you say you have a value around feedback in your organization and it isn't a real accountability for people, you do not really have that value. And so
Yes.
that's like my top number one tip.
I love it, love it, love it. Okay. I can't have enough or too much yes for this. If it is not a job requirement, then you don't really care about it.
Yes.
All right. So I asked you how and why people might get a hold of you. If this is an intriguing conversation to you, if you clicked in because you want to know how to stop wasting time and Goodwill in your next performance review, get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Aaron Schmookler on LinkedIn. You can also find us at theyesworks.com. We have a say goodbye to annual reviews guide. How can you stop wasting time with these horrendous annual reviews and actually get time and performance back by having reviews more frequently? We've got a guide to help you do that. If you are looking to build the kind of trust that Kieran and I have been talking about, then you might be interested to know about the CEO who told me last week, I was walking on eggshells with my team. And in the month since we started working with you, we have a shared vocabulary that's allowing us to be much more direct. And someone else on his team said there's a clear demarcation between before and after. So if you'd like to engineer trust into the way your team interacts, into the team dynamics, so that you can achieve more together with more fulfillment, then I encourage you to reach out to me. I love this stuff. I'm doing my life's work, and I'd love to make you a part of it. My fourth suggestion: use specific illustrations of fact. And so Kieran started us off with be specific. I'm going to bring us right back full circle to be specific, and add, this is about behaviors. There's no feedback that's going to be useful about stuff that violates what I call the get out of my head rule. So what is the get out of my head rule? Well, my intentions, my attitude, my beliefs, what I'm trying to accomplish, what I want, all of those things exist inside my head. So we often give each other feedback. I don't like your attitude, or I love your attitude. Thank you for the way you always try to do this, or please stop trying to sabotage that. All of that stuff, those things exist inside my head. You can't really know them, so don't give me feedback about them. One of the things that this is, it may sound like a restriction, and it is hard, And at the same time, it's incredibly freeing because it allows me to say, here's a thing that you did, right? A robot watching a video camera, a tape recorder, would have been able to see the things that you do, hear the things that you say, and make some statements of fact about how you did those things. That is the realm of effective feedback.
I love that you brought us to full circle on that. And I will add again, some groups of people tend to receive feedback that is specific illustration of fact more than others. So, for instance, if you go to the report that I mentioned and you look at some of the demographic insight, you'll find that women receive 22% more feedback about their personality than men. You got a great attitude. You're really nice, you're really friendly, you're really
Yeah.
collaborative. And although we didn't talk about it per se today, I will add on that if you're using AI tools to help you in the formulation of your feedback that were not designed with this kind of bias in mind, you are very likely perpetuating what's out there. So I give this really interesting data point about an experiment we did with ChatGPT last year. We looked at sample feedback. We asked the system to write sample feedback for pair prompts that were structured in pairs, right? So write me constructive feedback for a digital marketer who had a tough first year, who went to Harvard University. And then we wrote the same prompt and we said, same deal, who went to Howard University, which is a prominent HBCU. And it turns out the patterns that show up are super alarming. So the theoretical constructive feedback for the Harvard alum are things like, you should step up to lead more, right? You should take more leadership opportunities. Maybe you're a little condescending. For the Howard alums, the imputed constructive feedback is like, your technical skills are not there, or you don't have attention to detail, right? So these racial biases that end up encoded in how all of us have written these documents for decades and decades that are the training data can get perpetuated. And so you're right, the specific illustrations of fact, which by the way are always highly personal, right? You can't write them generically because they're literally about your work.
This thing happened on such and such a date.
Exactly. Some groups of people are much more likely to receive them than others. And because of that, tools that are trained on that prior set of writing without taking the biases into account tend to propagate this. So I expect we're going to find, as people adopt tools, if they're not designed with this in mind, in 3 years, we're going to see the bias gaps widen, not narrow. And obviously, like we set out at Textio to build these tools with the bias gaps in mind. But it's really hard to do if you're not conscious of how you're creating the training set, because like the machines didn't make up the biases.
Right.
We did.
This is not a referendum on the machines. This is a, how did the machines learn what they know? It's by looking at the everything that's out there on the internet, and we're the folks who put the stuff out there, right?
Exactly.
So it's learning.
So I love this.
It's going to become a feedback loop.
Yeah, if you stick to the specific illustrations of fact, you will always be personal, relevant, specific, work focused, which is hard to go wrong, right?
Indeed. I think I did a something kind of like this, a show like this with a woman named Elaine Lynn Herring years ago, and Elaine is wonderful. We were talking about feedback, and she was talking about feedback that she received once from a boardroom full of clients. Somebody who booked her, not one of the direct clients, said, what we before tomorrow, one of the things that I've heard from them and that you might want to take on board is that your demeanor should be more man-like. Right.
Wow.
So speaking of bias and violating the get out of my head rule, right? All these things, it's kind of like, well, it's got to leave the person with, at best, the question, what does that look like? What am I supposed to do with that? At best.
At best. It usually leaves the person, if they have any choice in employment, saying, and we know, again, we know this from the data when we look at the connection between
Yeah.
feedback quality and employee attention, retention, and attrition. People tend to leave. They walk out
Yeah.
the door. So
In the years since we did that episode, Elaine has moved on to work about unsilencing your silence and unsilencing the silence of others. And so she might have responded to that differently now than she did then. And to her great credit, what she did, and if you're watching this and you are someone who is reviewed and you're getting non-statements of fact or requests that you're not sure how to interpret, ask. And to her credit, she said, "What does more man-like look like?" And she learned that she had been less direct than they wanted. And it simply was some form of her communication had seemed indirect to them. And so the next day she came in and didn't beat around the bush in any respect, and things went very well. If you're not asking for that detail, and it shouldn't be your responsibility, and yet it is, right? It's all of our responsibility to ask for what we need. That's maybe a bonus there.
I love that.
Kieran, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show, and I've learned a lot talking with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really passionate about this stuff. And it's really, I will just say, like, one final thing. It's really hard. Like, it's so
Mm,
much easier to talk through the best practices. And I have been that manager afraid to give difficult feedback, right?
mm,
I've been that manager in the last 6 months, right? I've been
yes.
doing this for decades, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
really, really hard. And so the fact that you find it hard doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means
Mm,
you're normal, and the fact that you find it hard means you're responsible enough to care. So, like, don't be intimidated by the fact that it's difficult to do this well. Like, this is what you're paid for as a manager, right? Is developing the skill. So it's okay that it's not easy, and it may never get totally easy.
what an
um
important
and
way to wrap it up.
yeah.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you everybody else who has been hanging out with us. I know this has been valuable for me, so I trust it's been valuable for you.